Hi everyone, this video is for day one of our inequality work. You should be in your yellow packet right now on page 2. So we're going to go through pages 2, 3, and some of page 4 in this video, okay? So on page 2 at the top here, we start with just a word bank with some inequality vocab because you really need to know what these symbols mean in order to go through this part of the unit. So I started by putting the equals under the equal sign because that should be obvious for everybody. Hopefully we remember from either 6th grade or elementary school even that the sign that looks like an L, right? It's just tilted like this. That one represents is less than. And it's really important that you put the is there because otherwise less than, if you remember from expressions, means to subtract and switch, which is different than is less than, which tells you to use this symbol, okay? So then obviously this symbol is going to be is greater than or is more than. Okay, so we're going to put those two there. The word is represents equals, and actually you might not remember, but we actually did some examples with that. So when you see is, that represents equals. Then when you have the is less than sign and it's underlined, think of that underline as one of these underlines in the equals. So that adds on is less than or equal to. Okay? And then obviously the other way underlined would be is greater than or equal to. Okay, so that leaves at least and at most. And these are the two that are tough to remember. So I often encourage students, instead of just trying to memorize it, instead put it in context. Okay, so I'm going to do this kind of up here. You don't need to write this down on your paper if you don't want to. If I write, I have at least 20 pairs of shoes. What does that mean? I have at least 20 pairs of shoes. So if you think about that, that means that I have 20 or more. I could have 21, 22. I could have 30. I could have 50. I could have 100. So it's 20 or more. So this one's confusing because even though it's at least, so your brain thinks of less than, it actually means is greater than or equal to. This is where that at least goes. And I'm actually going to star this because it is one of the more confusing ones, and I would recommend that you do the same on your paper. So then the opposite thinking obviously happens for at most. So if I write, I have at most $50, that means that I could have 50, or I could have 40, or I could have 38, or I could have 2, or I could have 0. So I could have 50 or less if 50 is the most that I could have. So again, you're reading at most and your brain thinks more, but it's actually is less than or equal to is the at most. So again, I'm going to star that so that you can look back at it. Because like I said, students will confuse this again and again. That's just what happens. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go down to the bottom and take a little bit of notes here. Let me switch to a pen so you guys can see this a little bit better. Okay. So an inequality is a mathematical sentence, just like an equation. But an inequality contains one or more of the following symbols. And these are the symbols that we saw up here. It's either going to be a less than, is greater than, is less than or equal to, is greater than or equal to, or technically it could be is not equal to. These are all inequality symbols. An inequality states that two values are not equal, okay? That two values have a relationship, but that relationship is not equal to each other. Inequalities have multiple solutions, whereas an equation only has one solution. So that's really the big difference between inequalities and equations. Okay? All right, so now we're going to flip to page 3. So I'm just going to take a minute and put the symbols down. This is like a nice little cheat sheet right here for graphing inequalities. That's what this chart focuses on, okay? I'm actually going to write that on the top here. This is our chart for how to graph inequalities. Okay, so when you see this sign here, this sign is less than, okay? Is less than. When we put this on a graph, it's going to be an open circle, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. This sign here is greater than, and again, that's going to be an open circle. Remember, when we take a sign and we underline it, then we add on. So this one is going to be is less than or equal to. But then remember, this one is also at most. I'm going to write that in caps because, again, that one's confusing. It's kind of hard to remember. This one, because it's underlined, is going to be a filled in circle. Okay? And this will make more sense to you in a minute. And then this guy is the opposite. Is greater than or equal to. And at least. And again, this is going to be a filled in dot. Okay? All right, if you need to pause your video to make sure that you have this chart filled in, go ahead and do it. Other guys, we're going to move down here and see this in action. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our inequality and we're going to graph it on a number line. Okay? So what this says is F is greater than 3. Okay? So let's give F some context. Let's say F is frogs, okay? So this means I have greater than 3 frogs. So on a number line, we're going to put the dot on 3. But because it's greater than, it's not equal to, we're going to do an open dot. That open dot, I want you to think of like a hole. I do not have 3 frogs. Okay, so it's a hole here, but I can have greater than 3 frogs. So from that dot, we're going to draw an arrow to the right because those are where the numbers are that are greater than 3. Okay? Number 2, m is less than -1. Okay? M is less than -1. So let's say the temperature in Minnesota is less than -1. So again, we're going to put the dot on -1, but if the temperature in Minnesota is less than -1, that means it's not -1, which is why we have that open dot, that hole there. And then we're going to draw an arrow to all the values that are less than -1, which goes to the left. For number 3, this says A is greater than or equal to -3. Okay? A is greater than or equal to -3. So again, we're going to put the dot on -3, but if it's greater than or equal to, that means it could be -3. So now we don't have a hole, we have a closed-in dot. This is a point. -3 fits here. But A could be greater than -3, so we also need that arrow to the right. And then our last one. So this one's a little confusing because we have the variable on the right. So what you might want to do is take a second and flip it. So do we see how this little arrow here is pointing to the P? The sign is pointing to the P. So when you flip the P and the 2, make sure you flip the sign also. Okay? So now what this says here is P is less than or equal to 2. Well, that means it could be 2. So we're going to fill in that dot, but then it could be less than 2. So we draw an arrow to the left. Okay? So again, if you need to pause the video, go ahead. But now we're going to flip to page 4 and we're going to do the opposite. Okay? So now I'm giving you the graph and we're going to write the inequality. Okay? So we're going to start with a variable, any variable you want. So I'm just going to pick n. Okay? Then you identify where the dot is. In this case, it's on 5. Then you look at the arrow. Which direction is it going? And it's going to the left. It's pointing to the numbers less than 5. So we need is less than. And then because the dot is filled in, we need this to be underlined. So there's our inequality. N is less than or equal to 5. For number 2, again, we're going to pick a variable. I'm going to pick A. The dot is on -3, so I'm going to put -3 here. My arrow is again going to the left. It's pointing to the numbers less than -3. So we need is less than. And this is an open circle, so we are not going to underline it. We're done. A is less than -3. And number 3, again, we start with a variable. I'm going to pick Y. Our dot is on the 0, so we have put that there. Our arrow is going to the right. That means it's the numbers that are greater than 0. So we need an is greater than sign. And again, this is an open dot, so we do not underline it. We're done. Y is greater than 0. And last one, we're going to pick a variable. The dot's on -4. The arrow is going to the right, so that's is greater than. But because that dot is filled in, we need to underline that sign. Okay? So in class, we did these bottom ones. But if you were not in class, that's okay. You can go ahead and try these on your own. Or, you can email your teacher and see if your teacher wants you to do these. Okay? But these are the notes and the practice for graphing inequalities. Okay? Thanks so much, everyone. If you need anything, as always, reach out for help. Okay? Have a great day. Bye-bye.